Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial, we're going to look at how we can specify different ranges of colours with start colours and end colours for different numbers of iterations for each of our pixels. So all the pixels that have 0 to, let's say, 100 iterations, we want to have a start colour and end colour for those pixels. For the pixels that have a number of iterations that goes from 100 to 300, we want to have a different start and end colour for those, and so on. And of course, the end colour of the end of one range will be the start colour for the end of the next range, because we want it to look smooth. One little thing I'm going to do here is I'd like to go to fractalcreator.cpp, and just for the moment, let's just change this to be, let's say, completely blue, because I just like to work with nice bright colours that I can easily see. So what we've got at the moment is this. Okay, so I'm just going to create a method in Fractal Creator at the moment that allows us to specify colour ranges. So the way I'm going to do this is I'll go to the public section here and I'll create a method. Let's call it something like, let's call it add range maybe. I think that's not hopefully too misleading. When we specify a range, we're going to just have to specify the number of iterations of the end point of that range. So I'm going to simplify this a little bit by assuming that the first range is going to be 0 iterations onwards, and I'm going to assume that at 0 iterations the colour will be completely black. So I'll make that assumption to try to simplify things a bit, and then we can add another colour range by specifying the number of iterations that this applies to. But I don't want to specify actual numbers of iterations. I'd like to specify a fraction. So let's make this a double, and we'll say here, let's call it range end. So that's actually going to be like, for example, 0.7. If we have 1,000 iterations, would mean that this range starts at the end of the last range and finishes at 700 iterations. And then we'll also specify a colour. So let's say const RGB reference. We'll call this just RGB. So we want to, when we call this method in our main function, we want to add this and this to two vectors, so both this and this. So if you want to pause the video and have a go at implementing that, then please go ahead. So you'll need a vector for the range ends and a vector for the RGBs. So I'll implement that now. So up here in Fractal Creator, we need to check that we've included vector, and I haven't, so I'm going to include it. Include vector. And then we'll add 2 new member variables here. I'll maybe put a line under here to kind of separate them out a bit. So we're going to have a vector double, which we'll call ranges. Let's call it m underscore ranges. And we'll have a vector of RGB, which we'll call colours. I'll stick to the American spelling there as well. In fact, m underscore colours. Now it's really easy to implement this method add range. So we'll go to fractalcreator.cpp, and somewhere, let's maybe put it sort of near, well, let's put it near this add zoom. In fact, I might move these 2 methods to the top because they're the public interface of this class. We just need to say m underscore ranges dot add range end and m underscore colors dot, sorry, not add, push back, of course, for a vector. Thinking of Java or something there. So push back. It's giving me an error, RGB, just because it's not we've not said it's a member yet. So let's put that in. Let's also cut these 2 methods, add range and add zoom, and I'm going to move them near the top because these along with run, they form the public interface of this class. So if I save that, now in main, we should be able to say stuff like fractal creator.add range. And for example, well, I might actually change this a little bit. We want to ultimately say stuff like 0.3, and we specify a color that goes from 0 to 0.3. So that could be RGB. Let's say I'll just make something up for the moment, and let's make it just maximum red. And then let's add a couple more. So let's say that from 0.3 to 0.5 we're adding in green, and then up to 1.0, which is going to be the end, we're making actually white. So this will probably look terrible. I'm just making up some values that we can play around with for the moment. Now in fractal creator.h here, so we've got this vector of ranges, but come to think of it, it will be better if we already, when we call that method, when we call add range, it will be better to translate this into actual numbers of iterations. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to change that to an int already and go to fractal creator.cpp. And when we actually do the add range, instead of pushing back the range end, I'm going to push back range end times Mandelbrot max iterations. So we can specify the range end as a maximum number of iterations. Okay, so I think that's good. And now we're going to have to go on to implementing how this works. And there's going to be a few steps along the way to that. We're going to try to test the steps a bit as we go along. So what we're trying to achieve is that for every range of iterations, as I say, we're going to... So for the first range, we'd start with black and it would finish with this colour. The second range would start with this colour and finish with this colour. And then here we'd have another range starting with this colour and finally finishing, when we get close to max iterations, with this colour. And we need to calculate actually the number of pixels in each range, which maybe we'll do that next. So you could have a go at that if you want. It's a little bit tricky, but it's maybe worth having a go at. We'll add a method that can actually calculate the numbers of pixels in each range, but maybe there are some intermediate steps on the way to that even that we can use to simplify it. We'll take a look in the next tutorials. So until next time, happy coding.